Well, our first story is about the union budget that was announced this weekend, and everybody's talking about the new tax slabs that the finance minister announced. Now, there's been a lot of celebration about the fact that the government has given the middle class sort of a tax break, and that has left more money on the table for us. But here are the facts. The new tax slabs are on your screen, but really you can look it up on the internet. There are 7 new slabs in this system, but there's a trick. If you want to take up this system, you have to give up all deductions, which means, you know, that tax benefit you claim from your home loan, from your insurance policy, your mutual fund, your provident fund deduction, which is compulsory, home rent, health insurance, school fees, disability, education loans, standard deduction. You will have to give up all of those things if you want to switch to the lower tax system. And a lot of calculations have told us net, it's actually winding up to the same thing. So there isn't really a lot of savings, and there's going to be a lot of calculation. So each of you will have to sit down with your CA or your tax advisor and calculate in the beginning of the year whether or not the new system makes any sense for you at all. And to help us understand this a little better, senior journalist and author Vivek Kaul is in the studio with me, and Vivek does a brilliant job of breaking down finance and economy specifically to do with the budget. Vivek, I know you broke down a lot of it, and for a lot of people who are watching, the tax slabs was the most important part, right, which is normally the case. Based on calculations, it actually doesn't seem like there's a lot of money left on the table.
Not really. I mean, I mean, obviously, you know, I mean, in fact, one of the secretaries in the finance ministry has even gone on record to say that people need to do their own calculations.
Yes.
So basically, what you need to do is look at your own structure. Look at the taxes and deductions that you've been taking on up until now, and then do the math. And largely from whatever one has seen, it makes more sense to continue on the old system than to move on to the new one. I mean, unless you are the kind who just doesn't want to do anything else.
So lazy.
Lazy, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, then it's
and
fine.
then it doesn't matter.
It's your money at the end of the day, right? So
but technically, if someone was that lazy, they weren't making any investments to begin with, and we know those people.
Which is true. Which is true. So I mean, for them, it doesn't. I mean, it makes sense to be on the new system. So.
Yes. So actually, when I looked at it, and if you realize that some of the deductions that I called out, home loan, for example,
I mean, that's like,
or life insurance,
all of them.
Like these things, once you take it, you wind up paying it every year. So someone who has a running home loan or has a running life insurance policy, or any of these recurring investments, can't opt out at this point.
Even an education loan, I mean,
yes.
Section 80E. So all these deductions are there, and like a home loan has a deduction of interest on home loan of up to 2 lakhs can be taken as a deduction. The principal repayment automatically, I mean, it becomes a deduction under ATC. So there are all these deductions, and if you've been making use of them, I mean, it makes sense to continue using them.
Yeah,
why would you continue?
Yeah.
You know,
also, PF, which is a compulsory deduction for anyone who is an employee, you're already paying the PF. Why wouldn't you take that tax benefit? It doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't make any sense.
And as soon as you take a benefit, you're automatically in the old system, and it turns out in most cases you're better off.
So the government wants you to do the math. So.
Actually, the front page of one of the newspapers said nobody is worse off. It was interesting because nobody's better off either. Yeah. It's actually net the same.
It's a very black humor sort of joke. So
it almost feels like one of those things where these magic tricks where you pull like a coin out from behind your ear that was never there to begin with.
In fact, I mean, when Ms. Sitharaman gave the example where she said that someone who makes 15 lakhs is better off in the new system, what she didn't tell us was that, in fact, she told us that she's not taking any deductions into account, but then that's precisely where the point was.
Yes.
So if the moment you took the deductions into account, I mean, just something as, if you took a standard deduction, Section 80C, and a home loan, interest on home loan of over 1 lakh, you were much better off. So.
Especially if we consider someone who's making more than 15 lakh rupees in our country, invariably has these investments. And we want them to, right? The financial system, government and private, has spent the last 20 years encouraging people to make investments. This works in the opposite direction.
Especially as of now, when the savings rate has come down very, very dramatically. So. Yeah. So I mean, you can argue it both ways. Some people may say that the government is discouraging savings so that people consume more. But then I mean, you will consume what you have to consume.
So if we actually now, so this, to be fair, let me just say this one more time. the tax benefits or the tax deductions you received in the budget are not really deductions, because each of us has to do the math to figure out what applies to you. Especially if you have a home loan, then you're better off in the old system. If you're taking any deductions like we called out, you're better off in the old system. So you actually have to sit with your tax consultant at the beginning of the year in April and decide which old or new system you're in. More often than not, you'll find
the
old
only
system.
person better off would be your CA. So.
The CA has been given. So actually, interestingly, the motive that the finance minister announced was that you're not so dependent on a professional.
No, which is not really. I mean, the only way you cannot be dependent is when you decide not to do any of these, not to take any of these exemptions.
And pay the government more tax for whatever reason. So let me ask you this. Now, we know that we've been reading articles over the last couple of months of the fact that the government is already facing a shortfall in tax collection, income tax, corporate tax, and GST, as the case may be, from what they had expected.
Right.
They're expecting to make up that shortfall in the next 2 months increase and have a larger target?
No, they're not expecting to make up their shortfall.
Okay.
That has been slashed.
They've adjusted their
that they have. So they had hoped to earn, I'll give you the math. At the beginning of the year when the budget was presented, rather in February last year, they had hoped to earn 24.6 lakh crore through taxes. That has been since revised to 21.6 lakh crore. So they have done that. But the interesting thing is, whether that will be met or not is also, the question is there, because in the first 9 months of the year, the tax collections are down 3%.
Yes.
And the assumption is that the tax collections next year will go up by 14%, when tax collections are actually down. So there, it's a very optimistic assumption. So, if you were to ask
also, fundamentally, a lot of people were disappointed. The market was disappointed when it was happening because there was no real mention of jobs.
I mean, there was no big picture. I mean,
there was no revival picture.
Nothing at all. I mean, she sort of quoted people, everyone from Kalidasa to Narendra Modi. She spoke about Harappa. I'm fine with politicians making a political speech as a part of the budget, but then make a proper political speech. Don't just go around here, there, everywhere, trying to pretend to be making a political speech, but not making, it has to be, very, very focused. I mean, it was all over the place.
So if I ask you right now about the biggest problems that India is facing economically, jobs, a complete slump in our demand, for consumers. Our manufacturing sector is going through a fair amount of pain. Our agriculture sector is going through a fair amount of pain. Were there any solutions for immediate revival right now in this budget?
Right. So one, couple of things that I was actually looking forward to. I mean, I wouldn't use the word expecting, but I was looking forward to. One is the fact that I was looking for a personal income tax cut, because what that would have done is, that's the quickest way of putting money in the hands of people. Okay.
Yes.
Now, what has happened here is that we've come up with this new system, which is neither here nor there. And a lot of it is very psychological. So it's like, okay, people want to know whether they are doing better or not. Nobody wants to get into these intricacies, right? So if there was a proper tax cut, people would have immediately known, okay, I'm better off. And then that possibly would have transformed into some amount of consumption. And, we need to remember something as basic as this, that one man's spending is another man's income.
Yes.
So when people make this argument about there are not enough income taxpayers in this country, which is true, but then, you don't need the entire country to start spending at once. Even if a section starts doing that, there is bound to be a multiplier effect.
And the whole idea of we'll take money off the table from LIC, for example, which is interesting. The idea that you will list LIC, perhaps the government's most valuable.
Yeah, I think this was because these days people sort of tell you all the time that tell us something positive. So this is the one positive, at least if you were to ask me one positive bit, given that LIC over the years has been an extremely opaque organization. And just the fact that it's being listed will force them to share much more information with the general public than, and in a form which the public can understand.
Well, effectively, if you were to communicate to our audience right now, who are regular people trying to figure this out, what would you say? What is your one-line sort of description of what this budget is? Don't get your hopes up. Not what it will be.
I mean, yeah, just carry on with your lives, make the right financial decisions, and hope for the best.
So technically, nothing there to sort of revive us or give us jobs or in some way change any of the reality on the ground.
Not really. I mean, see, all that will happen once. See, there's a fundamental disconnect. All that will happen once you admit that there is an economic slowdown. So, only then will you start thinking of solutions, because once you admit there is a problem, only then you go looking for solutions. But when you don't admit that there is a problem, then where's the question of there being solutions?
Can we afford to go on any longer in denial without admitting the problem?
I mean, we can. Everyone.
We've done it for 2 years now.
But, I mean, so see, the thing is, so currently we are growing. I mean, this year, thanks to the revision, again, we'll instead of 5%, we'll end up growing by 5.7%. Yeah, I mean, but then, if India has to really pull so many people out of poverty and give jobs to people, our so-called demographic dividend, we need to grow at 8.5%. So that's not happening. So, and that won't happen if we keep keep doing things that we are currently.
So fundamentally, if I were to put it in a nutshell, this is what Vivek has told us, that there has been some sort of jugglery in our income tax, but it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And for you specifically, you need to sit down with your CA and figure out which of the two options works for you. But as far as the larger budget was concerned, there wasn't anything there that will immediately change what's happening on the ground in terms of jobs or in terms of revival or in terms of growth. But maybe the budget is no longer that space. And also, like he said, there seems to be a fair amount of denial about what's going on.
Yes, that's for sure.
That's for sure. All right, Vivek, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Faye,
helping
for
us.
having me.